everybody. First day of December, the year 2020. Roy Frazier's first in. So glad to see you here, Roy. And Roy, you know to share. Jenna is here. Lisa is here. Barbara is here. Barbara, you weren't quite first. Roy was the first one in. But I think that's a healthy competition. Who can get in first? Cindy is here. Larry Schott is here. If we can make it through December. This sounds like a song. Can we make it through the night? Chris Pritchard is here. I'm so glad you all are here. Yes, you know to share. Bill McNichol is probably giving a drum lesson somewhere. So anyway, how are you all doing? I've had some really interesting conversations today related to things going on. Sandy Thomas is here. Glad you're here, and thank you for sharing. I don't know how many of these conversations you'll want to hear about, but I'm going to try and give you a few. One was with a deputy political director for the Democratic Party here in Kentucky, and he's been a real supporter of the Rural Council, which I'm now the chair of. Mary Richardson's here. Hi, Mary. Glad to see you. And he had a very encouraging conversation with me, feeling that the Rural Council is going to be very, very important. By the way, on Friday, it looks like we have Stan Holmes, who's the chair of the Black Caucus for the Kentucky Democratic Party. He and I had a great conversation this morning. And so he's going to show up and do the interview with me on Friday. So that's good. Looking forward to that. Alexander wants to know who has their tree up. Give me a break. I don't have a tree up yet. But you know what? You have a point. Maybe the right thing to do is get your tree up as soon as possible, because that will improve all of our moods, and our moods need some help. Boyd Pletcher is here. Boyd, you know to share? Invite your friends. Get them here. The more people that are here commenting and discussing, I think that's great. Let's see, what was the other conversation I had? Spoke with Stan, spoke with Deputy Political Director for the Kentucky Democratic Party. Spoke with Chris Pritchard, and he has an interesting idea, which is he thinks it's maybe time to rebrand this thing that we're calling Getting Angry right now, and he's proposing that we change the name to Fixing Things. And I like this idea, and he thinks we should do it basically after the first of the year. So just laying it out there for you all. We would change the name from being angry or Getting Angry to Fixing Things. I like that idea. So Chris is here if anybody wants to discuss that with him. I think that's a great idea. Roy Frazier's tree went up today. See, you all are ahead of me. I'm now going to think about how soon can we get a tree up. I think that's probably a good idea. All right. Mark Maselli is here. Mark, you know to share. Glad you all are here. Well, let's look at the numbers. This is from yesterday, and look how close we are to 14 million cases. In fact, we have already crossed over to 14 million Americans have been afflicted by this disease, have gotten infected. Yesterday we had 1,238 new deaths that were identified as COVID. This is terrible. Texas and California are still kind of neck and neck. Wow, only 30,000 cases, 33,000 cases different in terms of who will be the new leader. This is not a race you want to win, I don't believe. Looking at Indiana and Kentucky, and you see Indiana with 5,665 new cases. That's a lot of new cases. And even though they've got more people, Kentucky has been doing a slightly better job, or a somewhat better job. I have to look at something so that I can have a chance of knowing what I'm sharing with you all. This is something really important I want to show you. This is the nation of Thailand. And the nation of Thailand is, as you can see, 68.873, basically 69 million people and they've had a total of 60 deaths. They added 11 new cases today. They've had a total of 3,977 cases. Let's go back to, can we get back to Kentucky? Kentucky has already had 179,000 cases. So the nation of Thailand, with 70 million people, 69 million people, has had a fraction of the cases of the state of Kentucky. Let's look at Vietnam, even better. They've got 97, almost 98 million people, and they have a total of 35 deaths. Now, they have done better than virtually every other nation on earth. And the question is why? Why do they do so well and we do so poorly? And there are all kinds of folks giving reasons. Well, you know, for example, they're racially less diverse. That in Thailand or in Vietnam, they're mostly Thai or mostly Vietnamese. And that's certainly an issue. But they are poorer countries. They don't have that much money. But I think Americans are going to have to dig into this a little bit more. Why did we fail so completely? And some of it, I think, is the division that is pushed, you know, the division that people profit from. In other words, getting you to, you know, if you're a Democrat, getting you to hate Republicans, and if you're a Republican, getting you to hate Democrats. And there's a lot of money to be made there, but it's also meant that we are dysfunctional when it comes to dealing with this virus. So just putting it out there, interested in your thoughts. There are, of course, other nations that have done well. Australia and New Zealand have done very well. Those are, of course, island nations. So they have some advantages. But Canada has done much better than us, and Germany. Basically, every other nation on earth has done better than us. One of the ones that hasn't done as well is very small, at least measurable. And that's the nation of Belgium. But do you remember months and months and months ago, I want to say in April or May, I showed you all a story from Belgium that they said, yeah, we're showing more cases, but we do better testing than anyone. We think everyone else is undercounting by 50%. So Belgium, you know, a different sort of thing. Debbie Mann is here, and she lost a friend last night to COVID. Second one in a month. Debbie, I'm really sorry. It's really terrible. Yeah. Sorry, Debbie. Terrible news. Have some other things to show you. So this is the Midwest in detail. This is from Johns Hopkins, but it's kind of curated by Naked Capitalism, one of my favorite websites. And look at that massive drop, for example, in North Dakota and South Dakota. But I want to point out to you that drop began something like 11 days before Thanksgiving, so it doesn't even begin to take in whatever effects we're going to see from Thanksgiving. So we may see another increase. I'm racing through some of this stuff. Let's see, I have to get my face out of there. This is a Twitter thread, and they're saying there's something funny happening with COVID hospitalizations. The proportion of COVID patients getting hospitalized is falling a lot. And just recently, and this doctor's theory is that hospitals are filling up, and so they have to limit who they can admit. So a patient who might have been admitted 4 weeks ago may get sent home now. Obviously a serious consideration. So this is back to the story that I talked about yesterday, which is the idea of Neera Tanden, who's been put forward by the Biden administration to lead the Office of Management and Budget. It's called OMB. And Neera Tanden is a controversial figure. One thing is that she has been really a Twitter warrior, and she's focused on Republicans quite a bit, but she has also focused on, she's really led the charge against progressives. And so that's why progressives are upset about her. And there's a whole, I don't want to get too deep into that. But one of the comments that was made yesterday was from Matt Stoller, who said he believed that the Biden team believed they were giving a progressive to the progressive wing of their party. So this is a tweet from someone else who said, I just interviewed the head of a major progressive group who said the Biden transition team reached out after the Tandon nomination to say, quote, aren't you happy? We met your demands. We brought in a movement leader, end quote. So that's interesting. That bolsters the tweet from yesterday from Matt Stoller saying that the Biden team thinks that Neera Tanden is a progressive, but you should probably ask progressives. And there are a couple of progressive policies that progressives tend to use as a benchmark. And one of them is Medicare for All, and another one is protecting and expanding the social safety net, so Social Security and so on. Okay, so here's the big thing I want to talk to you about today, and this is a really important issue, and it's from an article in the New York Times, and it's called Let's Talk About Higher Wages. And if you don't have the New York Times, you can certainly, I think you get 3 or 4 free episodes or 3 articles if you want to read the New York Times. But this is the article to read, and I'm kind of surprised that it's showing up in the New York Times. I have to jump back to the comments for a second. Jim Porter says one of our Square D retirees passed last week from COVID. Oh gosh, Sandy Thomas says a registered nurse tells me they only admit patients with severe symptoms. They send everyone else home to quarantine. So this is very difficult, and contrasted with the way that other nations have done so well dealing with this disease, it really is heartbreaking. Anyway, back to this New York Times story. I'm going to read some of the business from it. One of the great surprises or successes of the Republican Party in recent decades is the relentless propagation of a simple formula for economic growth: tax cuts. The formula doesn't work, but that has not affected its popularity. In part, that's because people like tax cuts. We all do. We all like tax cuts. But it's also because people like economic growth, and while the cult of tax cuts has attracted many critics, it lacks for obvious rivals. When Democrats do talk about encouraging economic growth, they often sound like Republicans with a few misgivings, the party of a kinder, gentler, better tax cut. This is not just a political problem for Democrats, it's an economic problem for the United States. I'm blown away that it's the New York Times that is saying this, but good for them. The nation needs a better story about the drivers of economic growth to marshal support for better public policies. The painful lessons of recent decades, along with recent economic research, point to a promising candidate: higher wages. You remember the Contract for Rural and Working America? Remember that? Higher wages for working people is a big piece of that. So this is something we have talked about, okay? Anyway, let's get back to this. Higher wages. Whoops, I messed myself up. I lost my location. Raising the wages of American workers ought to be the priority of policymakers, and it should be a measure of economic performance under the Biden administration. We'd all be better off paying less attention to quarterly updates of the growth of the stock market or the GDP and focusing instead on the growth of workers' paychecks. Yes, please. Set aside for the moment the familiar arguments for higher wages. Fairness, equality, ensuring Americans can provide for their families. Forget all that. The argument here is that higher wages can stoke the sputtering engine of economic growth, and the most famous illustration of this is the story of Henry Ford's decision in 1914 to pay $5 a day to workers on his Model T assembly line. This was higher than was being paid. He did it to increase production. He needed to have a reliable workforce, so he was willing to pay for it. But there was a side effect. The unexpected benefit was that Ford's factory workers became Ford customers too. They bought the cars. They bought the Model Ts. So workers, the basic idea is workers who are paid more can spend more. Now, the argument has been you can't increase wages because compensation is related to market forces. people will get paid on how valuable they are to the enterprise, is the basic idea. And the conventional wisdom is that as we increase productivity, that's the only route to higher wages. I'm going to stop right here because this is where I'm going to talk from my standpoint. The problem is that productivity got hijacked by the ownership class, and this happened in the late 70s. They were able to bust unions, they were able to stop the growth of wages, and since then, as productivity has continued to increase, we have seen the share, the amount of money going to the wealthy and the owners has just exploded, while the wealth going to wage earners, wages were being paid. It's really been flat or declining when you compare to the cost of living. So I'm going to go a little bit further. It's in the context of this worldview that it became popular to argue tax cuts would drive prosperity, rich people would invest, prosperity would increase, wages would rise. But one problem is the yawning divergence between productivity growth and wage growth since roughly 1970. Productivity has more than doubled, wages have lagged far behind. It's a serious problem. I'm going to wind this up pretty quickly, but you get the idea. Productivity obviously plays a role. You can't, if you've got a McDonald's and your productivity level is a certain place, right, you can't pay your workers more than your productivity makes it work. But the problem is that power and leverage matter too. And that's where the wealthy and the business ownership, they used their leverage to get better tax deals. Lisa just mentioned Walmart. Exactly. Walmart in Litchfield came in and kind of said to Grayson County, we're thinking about putting a Walmart here or in one of these 2 or 3 other counties. What kind of deal will you give us? So the county that gets all those jobs also has to give away tax breaks to Walmart. They use their leverage, and that is how the idea of wages being connected to productivity got destroyed. John Pennington is here, and John ran for State House in Kentucky, and he said in South Central Kentucky it'll not get much better because all the companies are labored by temporary service workers, which is going to keep wages down and benefits. That's another way that you've disconnected productivity from wages. You know, these things go over, and they use their leverage to take apart any leverage that workers have. And so this is a very difficult thing. And Alexandra says the use of temp services have created another problem. No benefits, no security. We don't have a health care. Can you imagine being a temporary worker, which everybody who drives for Uber or drives for Lyft or various other things, or does personal shopping, which is very popular during the pandemic. You've got no safety net. So this is why Democrats should be talking about the safety net. We should not be talking about cutting back on Social Security. There's another big problem that is brought up by this article, and so like I say, if you all can get a chance to read this article, you should. This is a big one. That people who are wealthy, the affluent, they live in growing isolation from other Americans, which makes it harder for them to imagine themselves as members of a broader community. Their companies get a growing share of profits from other countries, which makes it easier to ignore the welfare of American consumers and workers. The nation's laws, social norms, and patterns of daily life have all been revised in recent decades to facilitate the suppression of wage growth. So that's a big deal. That's all I wanted to say about that. So, but I think this is a fascinating and important story, and it's a way that Democrats need to move forward. Hey, I told you I'm reading a book, and I talked to you about it yesterday. Here's the book, On Corruption in America. This is a wonderful book, and those of you that would like to join along with me and read it, I think it's like $18-20 or something on Amazon. I'm going to, as we go forward, as I read it, I'm going to, pull out little kernels, little, pearls of wisdom that came from it. So this is from the book Corruption. And in the chapter that I read today, they started talking about money. She, in the first chapter, talked about, remember, the governor of West Virginia who was completely corrupt, $175,000 from a contributor, and Rolexes and flights on private jets, and taking the wife shopping, $175,000 worth of that. Convicted by a lower court and set free by the Supreme Court, 8-0. A little surprising. We also mentioned Bob Menendez, and as Mary said, don't get me started on Bob Menendez. He's a Democrat. He's also corrupt. So in this next chapter, she's talking about money and its relationship to corruption. She says, corruption was when people in positions of power used their power to capture the community sources of money, including by extorting ordinary people's meager earnings in the form of bribes. Corruption was when these ordinary people had no recourse, no means of redress. So that's what corruption is. That's her definition of corruption. Notice that it doesn't have to do with being illegal. Something can be legal and still be corrupt. It's where people in positions of power use their power to capture the community's sources of money. Okay? That's her definition of corruption. It's a pretty good one. So then she started talking about myth in this, who was it who talked about the importance of myth? Help me out. Mark Maselli's going to know the answer to this one. It's the basis for Star Wars. I can't remember. Anyway, myth is important, and when we ignore myth, we miss out on collected wisdom, and there's a purpose to myth. Joseph Conrad, is that who it is? The importance of myth? I can't remember. So she discussed various myths, and here's two of them. In Nigeria, the god of the rivers and the sea is named Olokun. Joseph Campbell, thank you. Larry, Mark, I know I can count on you guys. Oh, Mark, don't worry, no worries. You did great. Larry had your back. Anyway, in Nigeria, the god of the rivers and the sea is named Olokun. He's also the god of wealth, wealth from the sea. If you pray to him for money or children, whatever riches you want, Olokun will give them to you. So this is, the author was in Nigeria and talking to Nigerians at a time when wealth from oil had been destroying Nigeria. It was the basis of the country's corruption. In discussing Nigerians' addiction to money, she asked, how can you worship the god of wealth? And their response was, don't you understand? Olokun gives money to people he hates. It destroys them. Very interesting. The idea that money can destroy you, your focus on money. Well, I thought that was a unique thing. Well, then she went on to the myth of Midas, King Midas. Remember him? He was given the ability to turn anything into gold by Dionysus. Dionysus? Help me with the pronunciation. The god, the Greek god. And Midas had done something, and the god said, you can have whatever you want. The power of myth, Joseph Campbell, Mark says, or referenced. Anyway, Dionysus granted, tell me what you want. And King Midas asked for, I want the touch to be able to turn something into gold. And the god gave it to him. But unfortunately, he couldn't, everything he touched turned to gold, so he couldn't eat, he couldn't drink. And so that's the curse, the Midas touch. Yeah, I thought I was the Muffler King. Well, so to cure him, the god Dionysus sent Midas to bathe in a river in Lydia near the city of Sardis. And the golden touch left his body and it flows into the river. Now, King Midas was a real ruler. We think he lived around 700 BC and he died in 677 BC. Interestingly, this coincides with the invention of money, of coined money, made from gold and silver alloy that's called electrum. The rulers of Sardis were known to be wealthy, and they moved from trading beads and shells and goods to coined money, and that's what made them powerful. 200 years later, the story of King Midas, the myth of King Midas, was written by Herodotus, and that is why the river that Midas is sent to wash in is the river that is next to the city where coined money was invented. So I think the point of this is the idea that coined money is where we get into trouble, where it damages us and leads to corruption, that coined money leads to corruption. You know, it's kind of tough, I suppose, to become totally corrupt when you're trading small livestock, you know, or chickens, or, you know, ox, or whatever, or plants. Mark Andes is here. Hi, Mark. I know you're sharing. Glad to see you, Mark. Anyway, that story of King Midas I thought was especially interesting, and the one from Nigeria. So, like I say, here's the book I'm reading. I'd love to have a few of you all decide you'd like to read along with me. I'm going to try and read a chapter or so a day. I'm not going to try and run through this. So, anyway, thank you all for being here. What can I say? See you tomorrow. Happy December. And, you know, I love you. All right.